Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Structure and Flow. I'm Dr. Minette Riordan here along with my husband, Brad Dobson. We are the co-founders of the Path to Profit Academy, and we're super excited to be here today.
We sure are.
And there was a train of thought supposed to go somewhere.
We're happy to welcome Michael Prywes to the show today.
We've been practicing his name, can you tell?
That's right.
Like not Prywes.
But it's Prywes.
So as always, we love to start the podcast with a quote. And I think this one will be an interesting one to dive into our conversation today. And I'm sure you've heard this one, Mike. It's from Bill Gates, who famously said that intellectual property has the shelf life of a banana.
I actually hadn't heard that.
So welcome to the show. And at some point, I know we're going to talk about intellectual property when we get to talking about your book, The Gasp. But let me tell everybody a little bit about Mike, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So Mike has an amazing bio, and I want to encourage you to go read the long version of this on the show notes. And because there's some juicy stuff in there, but Mike's in the right place. He's such a creative at heart. He is an artist, an attorney, a creative, author of a book called The Gasp, which you're going to hear more about, host of the How I Broke Into podcast, where he takes a deep dive into big breaks of successful people. And he's had some pretty freaking cool guests on that show. And perhaps more importantly, from my perspective, is he's a father of two boys who are 10 and 8, a little league coach. And you're passionate about education. In fact, you were recently named trustee of the Board of Education in your community. And you're pretty geeky about technology.
Yes.
Did I cover it?
Yeah, you pretty much did.
I like how in the longer bio it says you're an active father. Two boys, I'll bet you're active.
Oh, yeah. I had to get a lot more active once they came around.
That's the truth.
So I'm curious how you went from attorney to really being a fan and supporter for other people in creative businesses. Maybe share a little bit about your own creative entrepreneurial journey.
Sure. Actually, I would say that it's the attorney piece that came almost last.
Okay.
And it is all the creative entrepreneurial stuff that came beforehand that led me to become an attorney.
Gotcha.
Which is unusual for most people. Very often you'll have attorneys who are producers and then they go into producing. For over 10 years, I was in the entertainment industry and in the online industry, and I just kept on running into legal issues and some small and some big ones, but what I realized is how much I didn't know even after having launched my own companies. And I went to law school at night because I was encountering so many different issues. At one point on New Year's Eve, I got a call from Thailand where a guy had paid for the deliverables to a feature film that I had produced. And I said, well, you didn't buy them from me. I don't know why you're expecting deliverables from me. And he a crooked sales agent had sold him rights to my film, Southeast Asian rights, for $15,000. Wow. And he wanted his deliverables. And I said, I'm so sorry. But I realized that I needed to become better educated about business, about negotiations, about dealing with people, because I, like a lot of creative people, I didn't want to deal with contracts. I didn't want to deal with the issues and negotiations, and I didn't want to deal with asking uncomfortable questions and things like that. So I went to law school at night, and luckily I went on scholarship, so I didn't have to become an attorney.
That's funny.
But then my law school professor asked me to join his law firm, and it was a trial law firm, and I had no trial experience, but I was a performance studies major and theater major in college.
So
and
you could act.
I could act. This is going to be just like Law and Order, and it wasn't. It was tedious and pugilistic and kind of brutal at times, and ultimately, it was not meant for me. But I loved the intellectual explorations of the law. And in many ways, law and drama are very similar. When you're going to the Supreme Court or you're going to the highest court of appeals in your state, generally you're dealing with knotty, complex, challenging issues. And that's really the way drama is too. So I decided that I needed to leave trial law, but I didn't want to leave law altogether. So I brainstormed, and this is all in the introduction to my book. I brainstormed with my wife, and I realized I actually woke up from a dream one day after brainstorming with her, and I said, I'm going to serve artists and entrepreneurs. And she said, that's exactly what you need to do.
Wow.
And so I actually I brought on a business partner, and we started up a law firm, and it was scary, but it was exciting. And we modeled it after, we modeled a lot of the business practices of the law firm after lean startups. Right. So we could, it was almost like an experiment on applying the rules of the 21st century business to a law firm. And that's how I ended up here. So I'm actually an accidental attorney, not an accident attorney, but an accidental attorney.
I love that. What a great story. And it says a lot about you and your own intelligence and creative curiosity that you didn't just go read up on the law, but you actually went to law school.
Yes.
And became a lawyer in order to be able to answer some of these naughty questions, as you say, for yourself and others. And I know this is just one small piece of what you do. And since this is a productivity podcast, one of the topics that comes up a lot is balance. I also know how important your family is, how passionate you are about education. How do you balance all these different aspects of your life?
Yes, it's not always easy, to say the least. And kids are definitely a complicating factor. And sure. When I say that, I try not to be judgmental in my approach to building a life. And I really think this is about building, and as some people say, designing a life, but I don't think it's that formalistic. I think you build a life and you have set certain expectations for yourself. It's my opinion that the most fulfilling life is the one that where your priorities align with your values.
Yeah. And
I talk a lot about that in my book. And I have this matrix called the team matrix. It stands for time, energy, emotion, and money. And most people recognize that they need to focus on allocations of time and allocations of money, but they very often forget about the allocations of energy and emotion.
Beautiful.
And with my kids or my wife or my job, everything, I try to bring together the ideal allocations of time, energy, emotion, and money. And one of the things that I find most people aren't cognizant of is that they say they don't have enough time, but it really means that they're not making enough time, or they're trying to put too much activity in time without taking into consideration how draining that might be from an energy standpoint or an emotional standpoint. So for instance, getting to know yourself and understanding where your greatest peak state of flow is very important in your level of productivity. And also, when you have kids and you have a family and you make them a priority, because if you value them and you make them a priority, you're going to have to adjust your schedule and your own matrix, almost like if you were navigating surfing or navigating rock climbing, where you're going to have obstacles, you're going to be dependent on the wave or whatever external factors there are, and then you adjust, you adapt, and you build your life around that based on day, week, month, year. I live by my matrix, but also by my calendar, which is very much part of the matrix. But understanding that when my kids go to school, that's grown-up time.
Sure.
And within that grown-up time, there are different rituals that will get me into that state of flow. But I also am very cognizant of the fact that there's something mentioned in my book, and I really believe in this, that we have the planning fallacy, that we always believe that we can achieve tasks, we can get through tasks much more quickly than we actually do. So I do not reduce, everybody's guilty. I do not reduce anything in my calendar to less than an hour.
Right.
Interesting.
So no matter what, now, to me, that's found time. But usually if you lowball it and you say, okay, I've got 6 hours today to work with, like molding clay, and that means I only have 6 items I can put into that calendar. But let's say I put 3 in, because we're talking about structure and flow. Maybe you want to be in a flow state, and it's a creative it's a creative act, and you're going to spend 2 to 3 hours, and then ultimately you end up achieving 8 to 10 things because you only expected to do 4 or 5 within those 6 hours.
I love it. It sets you up for success. Like, it totally shifts your mindset on how you're filling your calendar. So it's not dissimilar to your focus blocks.
Yeah, definitely. And when I was in the software world, it's rare that you could get something done in an hour. So
right.
We tended to we wanted people to estimate things with more than 1 hour and maximum 8 to 16 hours. We didn't really want big tasks to be estimated. But that's actually a fantastic takeaway, is just a 1 hour approach to any task. It's pretty effective. So I think I'd like to ask a slightly different question. We can get back to the balance part too, but I'm interested in how a legal service like yours can help creative business owners like us with our productivity. What it is that the law and legal services can do to provide a framework or provide structure that most creatives wouldn't necessarily want to have or want to deal with.
Contracts.
Yes. So the first thing people should know is that most of what you think you know about the law, you don't. And I don't mean to sound condescending, but there's a reason we go to law school for a long time. And one of the things that I find with creatives, what makes them so special and so inspiring, is that they try to do everything themselves. But this is an area where you shouldn't. And likewise, I think a lot of creative people don't have enough self-respect. And what I mean by that is they think they're offending somebody by asking for a contract. And the reality is that a contract is the ultimate expression of respect. It's mutual assent. It's an agreement. That's why we call them agreements. It's mutual agreement. So from my perspective, creative people need to educate themselves better before even going to an attorney. Because I think one of the problems that creative people have is that they're scared, and then they don't want to get overcharged, and they just avoid going to an attorney altogether.
Right.
That's one of the reasons I wrote my book. For instance, I cannot serve as an attorney to you because we're in different states. And that's something most people don't know. I get inquiries about it all the time. You're in California, is that correct?
Correct.
Yes. So I have an of counsel in California, Gordon Firemark, who I refer all my cases to. And he and I meet weekly. We do a Zoom call every week, and we hash out things about the law. We catch up, and together he and I are also hosting a mentoring mastermind for attorneys called The Complete Counselor. And this is to get them into the 21st century. But for instance, if you came to me, I wouldn't necessarily be able to give you legal advice. I would give you any legal information that I could, but the laws of California are different than the laws of New York or Utah or Texas or you name it. And so I think that's the first thing most people don't even realize. One of the things that I think people also think about when it comes to the law is they need an attorney. Attorney services are commoditized in their mind. And they're thinking about how much things are going to cost rather than how can an attorney make me money, which an attorney can make creative people money because an attorney can guide a creative person in identifying areas of intellectual property to exploit, drawing up contracts that are favorable to them, standard contracts or specifically tailored contracts. They can help identify ways to build separate business entities so that different business entities serve different functions based on what they're used for, such as intellectual property, such as merchandising, such as events. You name it. There, you can have multiple forms of business entities that work together or work separately. And so that was one of the reasons I wrote the book, was to give creatives especially, but entrepreneurs in general, a lay person's understanding of how to start up a business and grow a business and not break the bank, but really speak the language so when they do meet with an attorney in their area, they can speak somewhat knowledgeably. But most people just try to do it all themselves, and generally it's not worth it.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I read the book. It was great.
Oh, thank you.
Before we had our last conversation, which is awesome.
Nice.
So why don't you tell us a little bit more about the book and what people can expect? Because I think it's, and I love your perspective that you practice law in the state of New York, but you're really called, right, to help people understand how to have a better relationship with attorneys and also the key things to think about in their business globally, right? Because this is not a local issue, it's a global issue. So say the name of the book, because I love the name of the book. Tell us why the name.
So this is the book. It's The Gasp, How to Seize That Aha Moment and Turn It into a Winning Business.
I love that. It's brilliant.
Thank you. And it's really a practical guide, and it's actually an easy read because I try to make it narratively friendly. And
you did a good job.
Thank you. Like I mentioned before, I was a trial attorney, but I'm now transactional attorney, and my job is to help people avoid lawsuits, to do things properly so they don't have people knocking down their doors or sending cease and desist letters. And I try to explain all of that. I think especially with questions of fair use, for instance, for artists. Most people don't have a proper understanding of fair use.
Can you tell us what that means?
Yes. So in the U.S. Constitution, it's established that there's a limited monopoly for artists and inventors and writers of copyright and patent. And patent are inventions, ideas, and copyrights are original expressions of ideas. And patents, you go through the U.S. Patent Office, and copyrights, you can register a copyright with the U.S. Copyright Office, but in actuality, the minute you fix an original work into a tangible medium, you automatically actually have that copyright. It's just that the registration gives you certain benefits, like suing for attorney's fees. And also something known as statutory damages, which means that if there was willful infringement, you can collect up to $150,000 per infringement without having to demonstrate actual damage was caused.
And this would be in a case where you felt like someone was stealing your ideas?
Not your ideas, your expression of ideas. And that's a very important distinction.
Okay.
So I'll give you my favorite case, and I don't know the resolution of this case, but Getty Images is famous for shaking people down for images. And they generally have a legitimate claim. Well, there's this one, I believe she was a National Geographic photographer. And most people don't realize this, but even when you hire somebody, let's say you hire somebody on Fiverr or Upwork, most people don't even generate a simple contract agreement with the artist, let's say. Technically, you haven't established who owns the copyright to what you've hired for. And the default in most jurisdictions is it goes to the independent contractor, not to the person paying for it. So in this case, you had, I believe she was a National Geographic photographer, and she decided to donate her entire portfolio to the Library of Congress to be used for educational purposes, I believe, by the public. Getty Images decided that it was in the public domain. They just, by fiat, decided that it was in the public domain and started having it on their site and then shaking people down for use of these images. So she sued them for $1 billion.
Wow.
Because
I want to hear what the resolution was for that.
I do too.
I hope
and she has a colorable claim.
Yeah.
Their argument was it was in the public domain, and she said, I never put him in the public domain. I donated them to the Library of Congress to be used by the public, but not for you to shake down other people for license fees. So that's one of my favorite cases, but she actually has a colorable claim. Yeah. I don't know what their resolution was, but that would be an example. Now, one of the affirmative defenses to copyright infringement is something known as fair use. And there, I can teach a whole class on this, I have.
But I think it's so important for people to hear this, because I know dozens of people, literally dozens personally, that have gotten the Getty email or letter in the mail, or from other companies, or artists constantly complaining about their images being stolen and reused and under the name of a different artist. And so there's a lot of fear out there about, like, I can't tell you how many clients I hear from that they're afraid to share their art, right?
Yes.
Because they're afraid it's going to be stolen, or their ideas are going to be stolen, and it's happened to them before. And so they're, what is it? Once bitten, twice shy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this is a complex area of law, and one of the problems is that the resolutions in federal courts all over the country, all over America, are not in lockstep, and it can be very frustrating because it's almost nonsensical, some of the decisions that have been made. One of the cases that comes to mind and I like to talk about is a case of a Broadway show called Hand to God, which used the Abbott and Costello Who's on First routine verbatim. Oops. And there were multiple factors that were not just fair use, but the judge at the time had declared that there was fair use because it transformed the work. But even that is not well established. There are factors that the Supreme Court have established, but they haven't established how much is required. There's no application for fair use. It's just an affirmative defense that you kind of hang your hopes on. And so the first thing I would say is that there is no slam dunk fair use claim. And the second thing I would say is that it's on a case-by-case basis. And any good attorney will tell you, don't try to ascertain whether this is fair use on your own. Speak to an attorney before infringing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is regarding those pictures and these companies, an artist probably would be wise to retain one of these companies if his or her work has been repeatedly infringed upon. But of course, statutory damages only come if you've registered with the Copyright Office, and you would want to do that within the first 3 months of publishing. Now you can actually file, I believe it's changed a little bit. I believe it's up to 750 pictures per portfolio with the U.S. Copyright Office. I don't do any copyright registration on behalf of clients. It's just not worth it to me. But
Yeah.
but creatives should absolutely register for a copyright and consider retaining one of these companies. Now, this is distinguished from cease and desist letters, because there's actually a case that can be made. If 5 or 6 years ago you downloaded a picture from Google Images and you didn't know where it came from, and you put it on your website, you committed copyright infringement. And so when somebody comes knocking or sends you a letter, that's not a cease and desist letter, that's a demand letter, and they can ask for that money right away because you've already infringed. Mm-hmm. As opposed to a cease and desist letter, which is very often related to trademark. And in that case, that has no effect at law. That's also kind of a shakedown, but people get scared about cease and desist letters. They shouldn't. They should get scared about demand letters because they will likely lose in a court of law. Now, you can assert fair use, but you're probably not going to win if you were using somebody's copyrighted work.
Good stuff.
So, what's that?
I said good stuff.
It's
Thanks.
such useful information, and we could go on and on about this. But, a couple of things you said, I have one last question for you that really struck me is about the role of technology in all of this, because there's so much more opportunity for infringement in
Yes.
our era of sharing, right?
Yes.
And Pinterest in particular has been a site that's really struggled with this concept of the sharing and resharing of images. But I know you have some pretty interesting ideas about just where technology is going, not just in law and in copyright and trademark, but in education and in business. So let's talk a little bit about tech.
Yes, I'm a huge fan of tech. I'm a believer that it's not inherently good or bad, but I think we have unhealthy fears of tech, and we also have an unhealthy understanding of tech. And I believe that so my personal, if you want to call it a political perspective on tech, is it leans much more towards Electronic Frontier Foundation, as opposed to, so even though I do represent copyright holders, I do believe in a lot more of the expansive fair use. But less on copyright and more on something that is state to state. And so, for instance, California has a very different approach than New York to a concept known as right of publicity. And right of publicity are statutes that very often, in my opinion, they borderline in go against the First Amendment. In terms of people, a right of publicity is a person's right to exploit their own likeness, name, voice, what have you. And California is very hard line on that. To give you an idea, I know I've gotten a little off of tech here, but it will come back to tech. Robin Williams, when Robin Williams died, he donated his right of publicity to, I believe, Doctors Without Borders. The reason was because when Michael Jackson died, his right of publicity, because it's strong in California, was valued by the IRS, I believe, at something like $15 million. So the right to exploit his likeness in California was worth that much. And so by donating his right of publicity to charity, Robin Williams essentially saved his heirs a lot of money, and also gave the charity the ability to exploit that right that's really not strong in New York State. When I look at what people do online, I like the golden rule. And here in New York, for instance, I'm on a school board. We have something known as DASA, which is a relatively new statute, Dignity for All Students Act. And that's the anti-bullying. That's the anti-bullying act. And you can see both sides of the coin. But I'm obviously, well, I'm not obviously, but I am in favor of DASA. Cyberbullying, for instance, is an area where I think we see the worst of what tech can do, but we can also see what the best of what tech can do, because something like what we're doing today wasn't really possible 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that's 10 years ago, I can tell you, because my son is almost 11, but my son was born the day after the iPhone. So I'm really able to see, from being a parent, the evolution of us as a species so quickly, and how much our lives have changed. As my wife has put it, her job didn't even exist back 10 years ago when he was born, and so many jobs didn't exist. Mm-hmm. I do believe that we are going to be confronted repeatedly, and we are on a very fast turnaround on technological advancement. It's like that proverbial snowball it's really just building and going so fast. But we don't know what the workplace will be like. We don't know if we don't know if there will be universal basic income in the United States. Self-driving cars, that's going to change so much in our lives. And I don't think that takes us away from identifying what matters to us, because we may be shifting our priorities, but ultimately, if we don't know ourselves, it doesn't really matter what those technological changes are. Either we're going to have this malaise or this idea, lack of anchor, or we're going to know I'm prioritizing my health. I'm prioritizing my family. This is what I value most. I'm going to prioritize making an income, but I'm going to know what that income is for.
Yeah, and I think, for the most part, my views probably align with yours, but I just really think that technology is an extension of humanity, and yeah, there's going to be some really huge ones that come at us, but we're still humanity. Technology gives us the opportunity to bully in cyberspace, and it gives us the opportunity to support in cyberspace. It's
exactly
not really different than meat space. It's just, it's just an extension. Maybe we can do it faster, but
absolutely.
Now it does give a voice where others didn't have a voice, and mm-hmm. it does take the covers off, and give remove ignorance where because people can have knowledge that they couldn't previously, which is fantastic. But we're still humanity, so.
And I think it ties neatly into your team matrix about we can apply the team matrix to our use and adaptation of technology and how we're showing up in the world. And Brad and I were recently at a big digital marketing conference called Traffic and Conversion. And even though the whole event was about digital marketing and driving traffic and driving conversions, the theme of the whole event was that connection matters more than anything. And
Yes.
that how can we use technology and automation to drive actual conversation and human interaction, right? So I love the sort of double-edged, sword of the conversation, because I think there's still so much fear, especially I would say even a little in our generation, but certainly, in the baby boomer generation, that they're finding it challenging to just stay on top of the minimum access to technology. And then we come along, we're a little better. Our kids are a little bit older than yours, right? So they didn't have iPhones, but they certainly were born with a mouse in their hand. Right? Like, it's amazing to look at that perspective of how it's impacting everything. I think we'll see, in addition to money changing, right, the systems of money changing, I think we're going to see education changing a lot.
Absolutely.
So much more access to information. My hope is that people will still get together in person. I'm a huge meetup fan, and the philosophy of meetup that let's get together offline as well. And, we just sent our first kiddo, he's in his first year at university. And the whole reason for him to go to university was like, go live on your own, learn how to live your life inside this safe structure. We don't care what you study, right? Whatever education that you get is probably not what you're going to end up doing for the rest of your life anyway. Right. I'm testament to that. He's already changed his major once, so it's fascinating to me to watch. And I love Brad's perspective that tech is an extension of humanity, and how can we make humans and technology play together in a way that still supports our values, right?
Yeah, definitely.
There's a book by Kevin Kelly, who I believe is one of the founders of Wired magazine. It's a wonderful book. It's called What Technology Wants. And it posits the idea that we are actually part of what he calls a technium, that the growth of technology is intrinsic to humanity's evolution as much as anything else, that they coincide, and that it's an actual rhythm of the universe, which is, it's a pretty, when you read it, it's pretty mind-blowing, his approach. But I think it dovetails nicely with what Brad's saying. I also think that when it comes to education, we're going to see a lot of changes in terms of distance learning. You mentioned my tech side. I actually had gotten accepted and participated for one semester and then dropped out of Georgia Tech's master's program in computer science. And this is a perfect example of where I overloaded myself, because I tried to run my own law firm while trying to go to school, because I had done it before, but now I had a family and it just didn't work. But this program, it's the master's program in computer science, is all online. And Georgia Tech has one of the top computer science programs in the world, and it was under $7,000.
Wow.
And it was a MOOC program, massive online something course, I can't remember.
Yeah.
And people all over the world participated. So you're going to have a lot more distance learning. I personally believe, I've been a believer, that maybe the top 100 universities in the United States will thrive, and that the rest will become remote learning centers. Otherwise, I think a lot are going to go under.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see where that all goes. So, Mike, I know that you are super excited about sharing your book with people, and you actually have an awesome free gift, speaking of fabulous books. So tell us a little bit about your free gift for our listeners today.
Yes, well, I would love for everybody to pick up the paperback or the Kindle book, but I have a free audio book for your listeners, and it's at graspthegasp.com/audiobook.
Nice.
And it's narrated by Charlie McWade, who's actually mentioned in the book. Charlie McWade is one of my oldest friends, and he was also a guest on my podcast. He's a Nickelodeon voiceover artist.
Oh, cool.
And he does a great job with it, and all listeners to your show can download the audiobook today.
I love that. So for all of you who are listening, some great takeaways today, like just some of the simple things, like what's the difference between a copyright and a patent? That was a great takeaway about what fair use is, right? So there were some great takeaways. I loved my own personal takeaway was the team matrix. Like looking at everything through that lens of time, energy, emotion, and money.
And 1 hour tasks.
That was another great takeaway. And then the thing that I want all of you who are listening, I hope you heard Mike's emphasis on why creatives need more self-respect and how a contract is the ultimate sign of self-respect. Brilliant. Absolutely love that. So much juicy stuff. And it was just our pleasure to have you on the show today. Thanks for sharing your creative genius with us on Structure and Flow.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
Yeah, it was super, super fun. And we'll see everybody on the next episode of Structure and Flow. I'm Manette.
And I'm Brad.
I'm Flo.
I'm still Structure.
Bye, everybody.